Once upon a time, a young man in San Mateo, California found himself doodling in science class. The next thing you know, he's an art student, and before you know it, he's doing posters for the likes of Divine and Sylvester. He's our next guest, Todd Trexler. Welcome.
Thank you.
So when you were that young man in San Mateo, California, did you know that there was a budding artist there in the classroom?
Not really. Other students said, "Oh, that looks great," and I thought, well, I don't know why it is any different from everyone else's drawings, but I did start to identify with it and enjoying the artwork of other people.
Mm-hmm. And what was your inspiration back then?
Boy, in those early days, just to survive in school.
Well, now tell me, what do you mean by that, just to survive in school?
Well, I hadn't been a particularly great student as a high school student, so when I got to college, I thought, let me just pass all of these classes without any difficulty. Mm-hmm. But as I studied more art history, which was my main emphasis on undergraduate, I became really turned on by the work of my fellow students, and I decided that I would like to do some drawing and design. And as it turned out, I got my master's degree actually in sculpture.
Wow, and that was from what school and what year?
San Francisco State. I got my bachelor's in 1965 and my master's in 71.
So you're here in the years preceding and culminating in the summer of love.
Yeah.
What was it like being a college student at SF State during those psychedelic years?
It was wonderful, but I wasn't really aware of it until I returned to San Francisco. I took the summer off after I graduated, went around the world with a good friend of mine. And when we came back to San Francisco, my friends all said, something is happening. You're not going to believe it. There are these concerts at the Fillmore Auditorium. This is a magical time, and indeed it was.
And tell us about what some of those concerts were. Who were the people that were there?
Well, it was the rock and roll stuff. Everybody loved the Grateful Dead, of course, and went to the Fillmore Auditorium for those concerts. And then people started branching off. And I met a fellow named Sebastian, who was an assistant to Bill Graham, who did the concerts at the Fillmore. And he wanted to do something theatrical as well. And so he ended up getting the use of the Palace Theater in North Beach after midnight on the weekends. And that's how it all began, nocturnal dream shows and the midnight movies.
Wow, and so for those people who weren't here during that period or have only heard about it, what were nocturnal movies?
Well, they started out being kind of cultish and bizarre films that Sebastian had always liked and that weren't available for viewing. And then the audiences became more and more colorful, and pretty soon people in the press were speaking about the audiences as much as they were the shows. Mm-hmm. And then eventually there was a filmmaker named Stephen Arnold, and he had engaged a group of hippie gay drag queens with beards and glitter to be in one of his films, and they became the Cockettes, and they started performing at the Palace.
Now, the Cockettes, of course, have become kind of prototypical, stereotypical representations of San Francisco from that gilded, psychedelic age.
That's right.
What were they like?
They were crazy and quite diverse. They magically somehow got along well enough to get shows put on, but often there was a lot of dissension and people second-guessing other people and that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. They actually came out of the communes, and so they actually had a hippie base first, and then identified as gay individuals, and then eventually kind of married those two things.
Right. Now, during that period, were you out as a gay man? Did you
I was,
know?
But you know, that was a difficult time. It was before the American Psychiatric Association or Psychological Association removed homosexuality from their list of pathologies. And of course, we all know about Stonewall. That was all part of the same thing. And I felt really blessed to be in San Francisco at that time. I thought, this is a place where we can have our voice.
Mm-hmm. And do you remember the moment when you said, not only am I'm an artist, but I'm an artist with a gay sensibility?
Yeah, I think I do. I did things that other people considered kind of decorative in art classes. Other people were more serious, Northern California, hip pottery makers and that kind of thing. And I was drawn to materials like sequins and plastic things, and a lot of the materials that went into my assemblage sculptures came from Cliff's Variety Store on Castro Street. And I lived just about a half a block from the store, so I was there all the time.
Right. Now, of course, Sylvester, one of the great musicians of that era and a Castro resident.
Yeah.
Did you meet Sylvester over the sequins counter in Cliff's?
I think, actually, I saw him perform at the Castro Theater with the Cockettes. Not the Castro Theater, at the Palace Theater in North Beach. And then I was close to a group of people who had a gallery on Upper Market Street called the Upper Market Street Gallery. And he lived next door, and so we became friends in that way. And I ended up doing posters for some of his events and concerts.
Right. Now, was it an official sort of, you know, hi, Todd, I think you're great, do my posters, or, you know, how did this collaboration start?
We just spent some time together and laughed about things. He had a wonderful sense of humor, and he'd seen my work. So he said, I'd really like you to do some posters for me. Mm-hmm. So that's how that came about.
What would you consider your style?
Boy, that's a hard one.
Gay psychedelia?
Yeah, I guess so. I guess you could say that. The sculpture, the assemblage sculpture, was very dreamlike, and actually a lot of my images and drawings became kind of dream images as well. Mm-hmm. I was influenced by a fellow artist from San Francisco, Stephen Arnold, who was a filmmaker and artist, and I was very moved by his materials and the way that he portrayed things that kind of conjured up dream images.
Mm-hmm. You know, it's been said that a lot of the incredible art, both visual art, music, poetry of the late 19th century in France and Paris was fueled by absinthe. How much of the art of this period was fueled by other substances?
I would say a lot.
Including you?
Yeah. In the early days when I did posters for Sebastian for the Nocturnal Dream shows, I was paid in bags of weed. It was just that simple.
So how many bags of grass would it take to get up? 3 bags? So
Three.
Little Ziploc, or we're talking pillowcases?
No, just small eighths. Or a lid, we called them, I think. Then as things picked up, I started being paid, which was a nice relief.
Yeah, but what did you do your best work for? The green weed or the greenbacks?
I don't know. It was a marriage, I think.
Yeah. What's your favorite poster? It's hard to ask an artist to know, but was there one that you look back on now sometimes and say, I like that one?
Well, I do love the Divine poster Vice Palace, and I took the photograph for that, and I had a real wonderful afternoon with Glenn or Divine doing that poster. So I've always had a special attachment to that. I also really love some of the black and white line drawings that I did. I think that I did some of my best work through those line drawings.
You know, before we started this interview, you said that you didn't realize you were a quote-unquote natural artist until you were deep in school. Did you get more secure as you started working with people like Sylvester and Divine, and you realized, wow, I don't need to copy anyone else's style. This is the Todd Trexler style.
Yeah, absolutely. And I had people come up and say, oh, you're the one that does those posters. We follow those. We love them. Every month when they come in the mail, we put them up on our kitchen walls. And that was an amazing experience for me, because I really just hadn't thought about what the audience would be like.
Right. Now, you said Sylvester was a good friend and a lot of fun.
Right.
What was it like to work with Divine or Glenn?
Glenn was incredibly bright, funny, and just right on the mark. That particular day that we did the photos for Divine Vice Palace, he was in a pair of bib overalls, which is what he'd like to be in. It was very comfortable for him. And he split the sides because he was so large.
He was a big guy.
He was a big guy. And we sat in the back seat of a car, and Sebastian was in the front seat. I don't remember who was driving, but we were driving around looking for likely places to take photographs, and we ended up at the Palace of Fine Arts. And Divine got out of the car. She slipped on some backless mules, and in the trunk of the car, she'd thrown a couple of old 50s prom dresses that were made out of net, wrapped them around herself, and I took the photograph, and that was how that all happened. It was very magical.
And became an iconic image.
Yeah.
How different was the Divine, the character, from Glenn?
I'm not sure. It was hard to say. I think they were pretty well blended. He would joke about things. I love the story about when he was acting with other actors who enjoyed foods, and he would say, let's go out, like Ricky Lake. He said, let's go out and get a pie, Ricky, on our break. So he was very real, but he saw the humor in all of it.
Have you ever worked or met John Waters, who ended up filming so much of Divine?
We've met a couple of times, yes.
And has he ever acquired any of your posters? Because now some of those posters from those days, I mean, you were doing them as marketing, correct?
Yeah.
I mean, now they're collector's items.
Some of them are, that's right. You know, I don't know specifically. But I know in the plans for the new film, I Am Divine, they have asked me if they can use a couple of those posters in the film.
Well, now the question would be asked you if they could use. I assume that maybe, are your posters now worth more than when you were getting 3 bags of weed for them?
I think so, yeah. I think so. And the original printing are valuable now. They're on eBay and things like that, and they sell for several $100s a piece. This is the first time that they've been reprinted, though. I had to kind of search around to find a lot of them. I donated some to the GLBT Historical Society, and they were very kind in letting me borrow them back long enough to scan them and start making reprints.
Right.
So I found them from several sources.
Yeah. Have you had the experience of going online and seeing one of your posters that someone was selling for a lot more money
Yes.
than you?
Yeah, I
What
have.
was that like?
I'm kind of amused by it. But it was one of the impetuses for me putting together the website. I thought, well, people do seem to enjoy these posters and people remember them. And so I thought, well, why not put together a
And now
website?
they can live for another generation. And for people who want to experience your work and purchase it, the website is?
ToddTrexlerPosters.com.
Well, I'm going to go right off the show and find one, hopefully before it gets too expensive for me to buy. We've been speaking with Todd Trexler, great artist, great poster maker. I'm David Perry. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week on 10%.